هذا الأسبوع من وثائقي سوريا خيوط الظلام.
We have been very clear to the Assad regime. A red line for us is a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized.
But then Obama was very weak. At the end of the day, he did nothing. So I'm very critical of President Obama to this day.
Obama's mistakes in Syria left, quote, a more dangerous world.
Considering taking action as the civil war in Syria intensifies. The White House is reportedly days away on aiding rebels in their battle against government troops.
In Syria, hundreds more are dead, many of them children.
يا شعب بيدوم سآمن حانن الحرية حان.
83 people were killed when regime helicopters dropped barrels filled with explosives.
في حلول صيف عام 2011 أسكت القصف الحكومي أصواتاً كانت سابقاً لمظاهرات سلمية، وأجبرت حملات القمع المعارضة السورية على أن تصبح منظمة ومسلحة.
يلا غطوا أي واحد رافع راسه والله.
وأسس منشقون عسكريون الجيش السوري الحر.
الرقيب الأول محمد عبد الرزاق محمد، مرتبات الفرقة العاشرة لواء 85 بسبب المجازر ارتكبها الجيش السوري على انشقاقه عن الجيش أنا ومجموعة من رفاقي المجندين وانضمام الجيش السوري الحر.
Some of the Syrian soldiers who had defected from the Syrian army used their weapons to shoot at the Syrian soldiers.
Syrian army defectors have launched their first attack against President Bashar al-Assad.
They would often go up on the top of buildings and watch for the Syrian army or the Syrian police to come. That's how it started in the summer of 2011.
More than 70 people were killed in yet more clashes between Syrian army defectors and security forces.
Well, the so-called Free Syrian Army, never really was an army. It's a name that was applied to a collection of various opposition elements with varying degrees of effectiveness. And that's been reflected, I think, in the difficulties in trying to convert something like the FSA into an effective fighting force.
It was always more of a name, it's always more of a brand, like McDonald's or like Burger King.
So, the Free Syrian Army, the so-called FSA, is one of many groups that we in the West reached out to in an effort to try to find some group inside of Syria that was not radical and extreme, and who would be willing to really work for the Syrian people, where it's very difficult to find good guys.
The president said that he now recognizes the Syrian opposition forces as the legitimate representatives of the Syrian people.
خلف الأبواب المغلقة كانت إدارة أوباما منقسمة على نفسها بشدة. بعض الأطراف كانوا ينظرون إلى الجيش السوري الحر كحليف جدير بالثقة، وآخرون كانوا مرتابين في صحة ذلك، والرئيس نفسه كان واحدا منهم.
After trying to topple Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian opposition is not just losing the war, but also losing support on the international stage.
يعتقد السفير روبرت فورد أنه يجب على أمريكا التدخل في الصراع ودعم الثوار، وإلا فقد تنحدر سوريا إلى الفوضى السياسية وتصبح مثل الصومال أو اليمن، الأمر الذي يرمز إلى فشل الدولة في أمريكا.
This hearing will come to order. Thank you all. I apologize for being a moment late. I was there former U.S. Ambassador to Syria, Robert Ford. I should say ambassador, but not currently in country.
The opposition, as you've noted, is divided, and I think it's probably a reach to think they're going to unify anytime soon into one single organization. I don't think that's going to happen. Because different countries were helping different groups, the armed opposition always stayed divided and therefore was not as effective as it otherwise would have been had it been unified. Can they unite around a vision? And can they unite around a transition plan? They don't all have to unite into one single party. Some people, myself included, believed that it was very important to help the more moderate elements in the Syrian armed opposition, the Free Syrian Army, that we needed to give them money and supplies and weapons in order to help them recruit the young Syrians who were going to join the fighting. We wanted to prevent those recruits from going to the extremist groups.
What the United States really wanted out of the rebels was two things. They wanted a moderate replacement of the Assad regime, and they wanted a fighting force to combat the more extreme elements of the opposition, including the Al-Qaeda's and the Al-Qaeda affiliated groups.
Members of Al-Qaeda-linked group came to support the fight against the Syrian regime.
في هذه المرحلة استولى متطرفون بسهولة على أراضٍ في سوريا.
The first extremists began to arrive into Syria in July and August of 2011. They came from Iraq. They came well armed. Of course, they had experience from the fighting in Iraq, fighting against the Iraqi army and against the American army. And they established themselves in some of the cities, and in particular around Damascus.
جاء لاعب جديد ليغير وجه الثورة السورية.
Groups such as the Nusra Front in Syria, by late 2011 and early 2012, had more money. And so young Syrians who wanted to fight frequently joined extremist groups, not because they were extremists. Most Syrians are not extremists. They joined because that's where they could get food, that's where they could get ammunition, and they could even get a small salary, some cash, to help their families. In many cases, who had had to flee their homes because of the fighting and were now homeless, internally displaced people or refugees in other countries.
Nusra is, the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, and the international community was willing to overlook this because it served their other goal of weakening the Assad regime. And so the rebels, the militants, the terrorists, whatever you want to call them, depending on your political stripe, there's no question that they've been used by outside parties as proxies for their own geopolitical interests.
The U.S. State Department says the Al-Nusra Front, linked to Al-Qaeda, is trying to hijack the conflict for its own purposes.
There's an expression, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And we see that most vividly with respect to Al-Qaeda. In Syria, Al-Qaeda's placement was different. Al-Qaeda was seen not as a transnational terrorist group with links to indiscriminate atrocities around the world, but it was seen as freedom fighters.
السلام عليكم كيف حالكم يا شيخ عايزين شيء سلامتكم الله يسلمك بارك الله الله يجزاكم الخير وعليكم السلام.
Al-Nusra Front, it is linked to Al-Qaeda. It's emerged as one of the most effective resistance groups against the government.
By December of 2011, they were strong enough, big enough, and organized enough to carry out a set of car bomb attacks against Syrian government secret police facilities in downtown Damascus.
An
astonishing strike at the heart of a dictatorship, a bomb right in the command center of Syria's President Bashar Assad.
Rebels claim dozens were killed at the army's chief of staff headquarters.
في يوليو عام 2012 أدى انفجار قنبلة في قلب دمشق إلى مقتل 3 من كبار قادة الأمن التابعين للرئيس بشار الأسد.
They killed and injured a number of very senior Syrian government officials and leaders. As I recall, the intelligence chief and a number of others. These were very prominent individuals in the immediate orbit of Bashar al-Assad.
أحد القتلى كان صهر بشار الأسد.
And they indicated a degree of sophistication when it came to bomb making, a degree of ability to infiltrate areas that one would have thought would be secure, and to wreak a great deal of havoc on senior government officials and then Syrian army bases and a variety of other locations.
It's important to understand how the extremists were well financed and better financed than the moderate elements. That's why people like me, Secretary Clinton, CIA Director Petraeus, were saying we need to help the moderates.
Well, I can't go into specifics about what the CIA laid out as options for President Obama in the recommendation, but ultimately, as is well known, the decision was not taken to support the rebels in a very substantial manner.
You had the president on the one side of the debate in Washington, as far as I can see. You had Hillary Clinton, you had Leon Panetta, who was Secretary of Defense, I believe, at that point. You had David Petraeus, who was CIA director. You know, a whole series of people at the very top of the national security apparatus who were urging Obama to get involved, and the president chose not to.
It was a competition for recruitment between extremists and more moderate people. In the end, unfortunately, the extremists won.
I'm not sure that the right way to put it is that the revolution was hijacked by extremism. I think it probably, I mean, this was, as all uprisings, it's not black, it's not white, it's gray.
حققت جماعة النصرة المرتبطة بتنظيم القاعدة نجاحاً ضد النظام، واكتسبت شعبية ضمن شعب يتوق إلى تحقيق انتصار على الأسد، وطغت القوات المتطرفة على الجيش السوري الحر.
Why did it gain strength? It had money. Much of the money was coming from outside, from Gulf countries, from European charity organizations. With that money, they were able to buy on the black market food and ammunition. And the Free Syrian Army was desperately short of food and ammunition.
تحولت سوريا ببطء إلى مثال نموذجي على الحرب بالوكالة.
It has now become one of the world's largest net importers of instability, with countries ranging from today Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United States, Russia, Hezbollah, Iran, Israel, all of which have some allies or intervene to some extent in and over Syrian territory.
سوريا التي بلورتها النزاعات الاستراتيجية بين القوى العالمية والإقليمية انجرفت إلى عنف أشد من السابق.
صح الهدف 100 متر إلى الأمام 100 متر إلى الأمام.
Bashar al-Assad's regime is on the brink of collapse. But as Assad loses his grip on power, some gaining it may create new threats to the U.S. and our allies.
في عام 2013 ظهر بشار الأسد إلى العلن في حدث نادر في دار أوبرا مزدحمة في دمشق، حيث أعلن أن سوريا في حالة حرب وصنف المعارضة ضمن الإرهابيين.
تلتزم فيها الدول المعنية الإقليمية والدولية بوقف تمويل وتسليح وإيواء المسلحين بالتوازي مع وقف المسلحين لكافة العمليات الإرهابية.
خلف الأبواب المغلقة كان للنظام استراتيجية.
It was the Assad regime which decided from a fairly early point to label them all terrorists and then meanwhile doing everything it could to support and encourage the rise of the most radical elements.
The black flag on top of these tanks has become increasingly more visible in Syria. It's flown by al-Qaeda-linked fighters.
It opened up the jails, allowing Islamists to flood throughout the country in order for the Syrian Arab army to then say that the opposition was Salafist, that they were essentially terrorists. So Assad could ignore the more popular non-violent protesters.
Syria also appeared to have taken a toll on another terror group, the Al-Nusra Front. They operate mainly in Syria, where the group is trying to establish an Islamic state. The U.S. has not said that it targeted the Al-Nusra Front.
I think General Petraeus at one point suggested that there were people affiliated with the Nusra Front, the organization affiliated with al-Qaeda, that there were members of that organization that might be weaned away from it and armed and trained.
Well, what I have suggested for consideration is trying to lure away from the Nusra Front, particularly those that were previously in the ranks of the moderates, but who gravitated to Nusra because it was receiving a fair amount of support. And remember, we did do reconciliation in Iraq with some 80,000 former Sunni insurgents and supporters of the Sunni insurgency, and indeed that had been successful. And I think prying away some of those from Nusra, I think would have been a viable option.
Did he say moderate al-Qaeda members? I don't know what it means to speak about a moderate al-Qaeda member, and I certainly would not advocate arming moderate al-Qaeda members. And I said earlier, I don't think that arming the opposition was the way to achieve a positive result for Syrians. Arming an opposition, that's always arming a people who you don't control.
The president believed that it was dangerous to give the opposition too many weapons because it would make the war worse, and the United States would have to become involved directly. And the president did not want to be involved militarily in the Syrian war.
After an assault that is both total and pitiless by President Bashar al-Assad's regime,
Syrian government forces are pounding areas held by rebels. Caught in the fighting are dozens of children.
At this point, Ambassador, you were already feeling some frustration?
Well, of course. Frustration because the violence was increasing. We could see that a bad war was coming. People were getting killed every day. And despite the deaths, despite the bloodshed, there seemed to be nothing we could do to stop it.
كان لأوباما أولويات أخرى في أجندته الأوسع للسياسة الخارجية، في مقدمتها الصفقة الإيرانية النووية.
Can we just get an idea if you're optimistic about these talks? There's a positive move happening here.
We have a very serious problem of confidence, mutual lack of confidence.
Today, after 2 years of negotiations, the United States, together with our international partners, has achieved something that decades of animosity has not. A comprehensive long-term deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
في يوليو عام 2015 توصلت إيران والولايات المتحدة مع دعم فرنسا وبريطانيا والصين وروسيا وألمانيا إلى اتفاق تاريخي عرف شعبياً بصفقة إيران النووية. اكتملت الصفقة بعد عامين من النقاشات المكثفة لتقييد برنامج إيران النووي مقابل رفع العقوبات الاقتصادية.
President Obama, his number one foreign policy priority, the thing that he thought would make the biggest difference for peace in the Middle East and beyond the Middle East, would be to come to an agreement with Iran on nuclear matters. The president judged, incorrectly in my view, that to push back hard against Bashar al-Assad in Syria might alienate the Iranians and might drive them away from nuclear negotiations.
لكن بينما تحولت إيران إلى قصة نجاح، تستمر سوريا بالفشل.
American warnings that Syria could be considering the use of chemical weapons to crush the rebellion.
في 20 من أغسطس عام 2012 عقد أوباما مؤتمراً صحفياً، وعندما طرح صحفي سؤالاً حول استخدام القوة في سوريا، كان رد أوباما مفاجئاً حتى بالنسبة إلى إدارته.
We have been very clear to the Assad regime that a red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That would change my calculus. Thank you, everybody.
Today could go down in history as the day that changed everything in a war that's already killed over 100,000 people.
Did the Syrian government use chemical weapons against its own people, women and children? Is there new evidence? We warn you, the images can be disturbing.
بعد سنة تقريباً استخدم غاز السارين في هجمات قتلت أكثر من 1400 شخص. السارين هو مادة كيميائية مرعبة تسبب الشلل ثم التشنج والموت.
Potentially one of the worst war atrocities in recent memory. With Egypt also on the brink of civil war, this could be a turning point.
We not only had the Assad should step aside statement, followed up by virtually nothing in the way of strategy to implement the president's spoken desires. But a year later, we had the president of the United States making a statement about a chemical weapons red line, a clear warning of force. The possibility of military force if Syria used chemical weapons. And the failure to follow up on those two presidential statements, I think, had serious repercussions for the credibility of the United States and the credibility of the American presidency.
The biggest mistake is a tactical one, letting people talk about so-called red lines with regard to the chemical weapons, when that immediately led to an expectation that there would be an increased use of military force.
President Obama didn't do anything. He said that the use of chemical weapons against Syrian civilians by Bashar al-Assad would be a red line for him, and he threatened the use of military force. But then Obama was very weak. At the end of the day, he did nothing. So I'm very critical of President Obama to this day.
With the U.S. now believing the Syrian government has chemical-filled bombs, the Pentagon is secretly updating military strike options for President Obama.
يخطط البيت الأبيض لتنفيذ ضربة جوية انتقامية ضد سوريا في 31 من أغسطس، لكن الشكوك ما زالت تراود أوباما.
Good afternoon, everybody. I have decided that the United States should take military action against Syrian regime targets. I will seek authorization for the use of force from the American people's representatives in Congress.
We've heard this morning of the skepticism on Capitol Hill, even from Democrats, about an attack on Syria. So how risky a move is this for the president?
Now it's a test case for Obama's credibility around the world and credibility at home. By going to Congress and potentially getting slapped down, the president's credibility at home is in shatters.
However, the fault doesn't solely lie with President Obama. There were a number of those, especially Republican voices in Congress at the time, who argued to have a vote and to have a say as far as what U.S. policy would be. Then when President Obama decided to call them on it and ask them to put up a vote, they refused to do so.
أصبح الرئيس الأمريكي منعزلاً في بلاده وفي الخارج، حتى أقرب حلفاء أمريكا بريطانيا تراجعت عن التدخل العسكري المباشر.
I strongly believe in the need for a tough response to the use of chemical weapons. It is clear to me that the British Parliament, reflecting the views of the British people, does not want to see British military action.
Leaders of the US and the UK both declared that the special relationship between the two countries would be undamaged and that they would continue to work together to find a response to the Syrian crisis.
Well, the discussions at the time in the United States and then also with some of our coalition partners were fairly extensive. There were expectations at various points that decisions would be made. That timeline was continually pushed further, and it was not until a good bit later that the U.S. started taking actions.
I regret that the Americans, we could not convince President Obama to use U.S. military forces after the chemical weapons attack, which killed hundreds of Syrians in the Damascus suburbs. The American failure to act encouraged extremist recruitment on the one side, and Assad continued to use chemical weapons on the other side. So that too I regret.
لكن الأسوأ لم يأتي بعد. في الحلقة القادمة من سوريا خيوط الظلام يتحرك أوباما أخيراً. الCIA وروسيا وإيران تدخل المعركة، وكذلك البيت الأبيض.
The CIA is reported to have spent up to $1 billion